A rush of deals done in the final week of Parliament, including a transformation of the NDIS. But the government's still feeling the heat over released immigration detainees. The political contest has tightened as the year draws to a close. I'm David Spears. Welcome to the Final Insiders for 2023. In a race to the parliamentary finish line, the government cleared the decks and cut deals. Environment laws passed with the help of the Greens, a surprise deal with crossbenchers on industrial relations, and billions more promised to states and territories in GST top-up payments and a new hospital funding agreement, all in return for a new deal on the NDIS. We'll dive into that one in more detail shortly. New preventative detention laws were also rushed through to lock back up at least some of those released from immigration detention. But that didn't quell the opposition's anger. It's been demanding resignations and apologies, accusing the government of putting the community in danger.
The detainee disaster engulfing the federal government is worsening.
The arrest of a third former immigration detainee freed by the High Court has sent the debate in Parliament into overdrive.
As a government in this system, we are bound to observe the decisions of the High Court. You have one responsibility as a government. One responsibility to keep Australians safe.
Do you owe an apology to those in the community that have been subjected to misdeeds by some of these individuals?
I will not be apologising for pursuing the rule of law, and I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt.
It felt to me as if he was shouting at the women of Australia.
Will the Prime Minister apologise to the Australian people?
I am sorry any time someone is a victim of a crime.
The Albanese government is rushing through changes to citizenship and criminal laws.
The result of the division is ayes 68, noes 59. The matter is resolved in the affirmative.
Since the High Court's decision, we have taken swift action to deal with the court's requirement to release detainees.
What a shambles, what chaos. You don't even want to debate the number one priority of any government, to keep the community safe.
Descending on Parliament with a packed agenda for the final National Cabinet meeting of the year.
I want to run through the reforms that have been agreed to today, and they are substantial. Strengthening Medicare, extend the GST No Worse Off guarantee in its current form for 3 years. Reforms to secure the future of the NDIS.
The National Disability Insurance Scheme is here to stay. It is not going away. But we need to get it back on track.
We know what it was like to live without the NDIS. We do not want to go back to those days.
Meanwhile, the government has brokered a deal with key crossbenchers on controversial IR laws, hoping to rush them through on the final sitting day of the year.
Today is a really good day for workers' wages and a really good day for workers' safety.
This is democracy working. This is the Parliament working.
And with that, the 2023 parliamentary year draws to a close.
Mr. Speaker, I move that the House do now adjourn.
The House stands adjourned until Tuesday, 6th of February 2024.
My guest this morning is the Minister for the NDIS, Bill Shorten. And a little later, the Matt Price moment. A look back at the slips, stumbles and most ridiculous moments of 2023. First, let's check what's making news. The government's long-awaited migration strategy will be unveiled tomorrow. It will aim to dramatically cut Australia's intake after a surge to record numbers since COVID. A new Resolve poll in the Nine newspaper shows 62% believe migration levels are too high. News Corp papers report more than 70 international students a week are applying for political asylum. I understand the government won't be capping the number of foreign students allowed in, but will crack down on low-quality training providers and limit opportunities for student visas to be used as a backdoor to stay in Australia. Meanwhile, foreign investors will face a six-fold increase in fees if they buy a home and then leave it empty. The Treasurer is announcing the hike today, which is aimed at freeing up more housing stock for renters. Application fees for overseas buyers will also be tripled. And just days after the release of those NDIS reforms, an interesting story from the ABC's Anne Connolly. The Deputy Commissioner of the NDIS Safeguards Commission, Geoffrey Chan, who was stood down from the role, says he's been made a scapegoat and is suing. He alleges his boss, the Commissioner, Tracy Mackey, swore and admitted she might have to resign after wrongly telling Four Corners the regulator had shut down a program where children with disabilities were abused. Instead, Dr Chan says he was blamed. A judge has ordered his reinstatement while the case proceeds. Now, we're going to start this morning with the NDIS overhaul. This is a scheme that's transformed lives in the 10 years since it came to life, but it's also ballooned to the point where it's at risk of collapse. The changes put forward by a highly respected review team look necessary and in some areas will clearly improve the scheme. And when it comes to setting up new supports outside the NDIS, crucially, the states and territories are on board. Much of the detail, however, still needs to be worked out, leaving families to wonder what exactly lies ahead. Let's see what the panel makes of it. We're joined this week by Nikki Sava, Claire Armstrong, and welcome to the couch, Claudia Long. Great to have you here. Look, let's start with what's being called NDIS Mark II, with this overhaul that's being talked about. Nikki, what's the broad aim here of these changes?
Well, the broad aim, I guess, is to take the NDIS to what it was originally intended to be. And there's no doubt the costs have blown out, that, it is struggling to meet the demands. There's ever more money being thrown in. So there is definitely a case for it to be reformed and for some action to be taken against rorts. I mean, no one questions that the NDIS has done a brilliant job helping thousands of Australians, but it's got to be able to continue that job. And if it keeps going the way it is, it will collapse under its own weight and it will lose community confidence, and that would be a terrible thing to happen.
Indeed. Claudia, you followed this whole thing very closely. There's a lot to the changes, and look, cracking down on the rorts and the dodgy operators, there's no argument that needs to happen. The more difficult part is setting up supports outside the NDIS. Now, they're talking about foundational supports, but a lot of families, I think, are wondering, what is that going to look like for my kid? Do we know?
Well, not yet, really. And I think, too, a lot of adults are also wondering what it's going to look like for them as well, because the point of this review, like Nikki said, is it's about future-proofing the NDIS, right? It's about making sure that it exists for generations beyond its current participants. But a lot of this is just a starting point. It's really a group of ideas rather than a specific roadmap for how exactly those things are going to be enacted. And I think that an important part of that too is that the NDIS has always been driven by the disability community. They've always been a key part in getting it up and running, campaigning for it for years, protecting it, things like that. And so there's going to need to be a negotiation around what these changes are actually going to look like and how they can best be rolled out effectively as well.
Look, importantly, Claire, the sector are happy that they're going to be involved in this detail work, but it's going to take some time. We're talking 5 years in total.
Yeah, the government's given themselves 5 years for this transition. They're talking about obviously having tens of thousands of people that currently with just a diagnosis or a primary diagnosis automatically get access to the NDIS, shifting away from that as the entry point into the
because at the moment, if you have that diagnosis, you get into the NDIS.
Yeah, for certain disabilities, it was designed as basically a pathway to quickly onboard people to the scheme when it was being established, because they obviously, if you cast your mind back, there was a lot of talk at the start about the slowness of the uptake and getting people established on the scheme. What we're seeing now is the government will take, what we will see is the government will take steps to move toward what they're talking about is basically assessing how much a person's disability impacts their day-to-day functionality and having that as the basis for entry. The idea being that you then have this enormous cohort of particularly young children with early developmental issues or mild autism, not so much automatically getting entrance to an individualised NDIS package, but instead being looked after in a mainstream setting of a childcare, a school, could be speech therapy, could be a teacher's aide, and that's where we saw that deal with the states come in.
And look, this approach of looking at what someone needs makes sense, but you talk about assessing This is the big question, Claudia. Who is making the call on whether you're in or out of the NDIS under this plan?
And the government's going to have to tread really carefully on this, right? There's a lot of distrust in the disability community after the independent assessments trial. Proposal, exactly. And I think when people heard that word, assessments, this week already, like you could tell that for a lot of people, they were really traumatised by that.
We should explain at the moment, you can use your own doctor or your doctor of choice.
That's right. And so under these changes, as they're proposed, and again, they're just proposals at the moment, you'd have a lead practitioner or a navigator who would really be part of that process with you. And I think another interesting thing about this review too is that there's actually a lot of changes for people who aren't currently on the NDIS. The majority of disabled Australians aren't on this scheme. And there's going to be changes as part of this proposal that will affect us a lot. And so I think that a lot of this
could improve
things as well. And I think the tricky thing for the government at the moment is they've got this review and they're now having to say, well, actually, this is still an ongoing conversation. This isn't about implementing all of these ideas right now because we don't actually know how to practically do that and we want to know what your thoughts are.
But while they're doing that work, Nikki, they've already banked the savings. This was done back in the budget in May, and we're talking about a big chunk of change here, aren't we? It's something like nearly $60 billion over the decade.
Over 10 years.
That they have already said in the budget that they're going to save.
Yes, well, and clearly, you know, they've said that these changes are going to come in over 5 years, but they can't sort of sit around and wait a while before they start doing things, because they have to start producing the changes and making the savings. So it needs to happen pretty quickly. And the other thing also, I think, if they delay and they don't really move on these things, maybe the next government, you know, might decide that they've...
a different approach.
It might have a different approach and, you know, the whole thing becomes just another big mess. So I think Bill Shorten, for all his faults, and I've been very critical of him in the past, I think is probably the ideal person to do this and to keep pushing this, because he's the one who originated the scheme and he does have a lot of credibility with disability sector.
Yeah, just quickly.
Yeah, well, given that we are at the end of the year, I would actually add to that the way that Bill Shorten over this 18 months in government and even before that in opposition has built a narrative around who he's trying to help, who he's going after in terms of the rorting of the scheme, and the fact that he's involved the disability community throughout, and really the stakeholder engagement there has kind of been very high. I think this has actually made what could be, and still is a very tricky policy area for the government, kind of one of its strongest results of the entire year.
He's going to love this warm-up.
Sorry, I know he's probably listening right now.
But there is a tricky bit coming up, right? And Nikki mentioned this a little bit, because when we heard from Bill Shorten at the press club earlier in the week, we asked him, what's the plan if the states don't play ball, if they don't go fast enough? And the response was really like, well, you can trust us, everyone's on the same page. What happens if there's a change of government?
In one of the states.
In the state? Exactly. There's currently Labor premiers from coast to coast on the mainland. What's the plan if suddenly there's a change at government at any level?
Well, let's talk to the Minister, the NDIS Minister Bill Shorten. To take us there, here was some of the reaction from the disability sector, a hope at least from them that people won't be moved off the NDIS until alternative support services are in place.
There's no indication that that's going to happen. There's no indication that there'll be pathways to move people off. You know, they understand, and I'm pretty sure the government is very well aware, that these supports have to be in place before anybody can be offered them.
To be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if families of children with autism feel like they are still lacking clarity, and I wouldn't blame them for that. What we've seen today is a really ambitious blueprint for transforming disability supports in Australia, but it's a system that we don't have yet. And so what families will really need is an ironclad promise from all levels of government that no child with disability will be left behind as a result of these reforms.
We need to build a disability ecosystem that is fit for purpose for all people with disability. That gives us the best possible chance of a simpler, fairer and more sustainable system that doesn't send people unnecessarily into the NDIS. The second principle that underpins the report findings is the idea that people with disability need to be at the centre of the change. We heard that today from the Minister. It's embedded in the report and it is something that we will be working hard to ensure. Regardless of what the recommendations look like, these reforms will not work without the active and ongoing participation of people with disability.
Bill Shorten, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
So let's go straight to the heart of some of those concerns. Can you give a guarantee that no one will be moved off the NDIS until at least those support services, those alternative support services are in place?
We will make sure that the package as a whole is implemented. We've got to go through and look at each recommendation. Right now, you could have your funding changed. So no one can say to anyone right now that nothing will ever change in their package. But as a result of these changes, we just want to make sure that every child who needs support in Australia is getting it. That's not happening now. At the moment, there's two options. There's sort of, you're either in the NDIS or there's not a lot outside it. And the whole aim of this scheme, the way we make the NDIS here to stay for the future, is that we just don't treat the only off-ramp when a child is diagnosed with a developmental delay, the NDIS. We want to make sure that it's not one size fits all. But can I go straight to your key point about parents listening today? They fought hard to get a package. If your child needs the NDIS supports, that's what they will get. But if your child doesn't need that level of intensive intervention, now there'll be more choices.
No, and I've heard you use that, make that comment. I guess a lot of families would argue they do need that NDIS support. So just back to the question, to be clear, those who would, under the existing scheme, be on the NDIS, you're not going to be moved off until you've got those alternatives there?
We've said that as we implement these reforms, it's got to be done concurrently with building out supports beyond the NDIS. The secret of this, and it's not really a secret, the secret of this plan is that the best way to secure the future of the NDIS and the service it offers participants is to make sure it's not the only lifeboat in the ocean.
So the foundational supports, this new system outside the NDIS, this is for people with developmental delays, you've said, so-called mild autism. What do those supports look like? Can you explain to families what they can expect?
Roughly in Australia, there's about 4.5 million people who would say they have a report they have a disability. About 600,000 of those people are on the scheme. But there is it's a bit of a lottery for the other, 3.9 million Aussies with disabilities, what support they get. What the review said is that we need to develop foundational supports. That could be for people with psychosocial disabilities, that could be access to community mental health clinics. For precious children as they are born and grow and start their journeys, if some of the kids are taking non-standard journeys, it's the creation of a disability version of a maternal and child health nurse. Wouldn't it be good in this country, just as we do with vaccinations and early screening for hearing loss and vision, if we could also have universal screening for developmental delays, and that way we can then work out what the options are. And sometimes the option doesn't have to be hour upon hour of sort of intensive therapy. It could be teaching parents how to raise kids with developmental delays.
So just on that, is it your plan to screen every infant, say at 6 months old?
I can't put the age group because I'm not, a clever medical researcher, but there's been amazing breakthroughs in Australia. In this country, we've got some of the best child paediatrician researchers anywhere in the world. And I certainly do have the view that eventually we want to arrive at universal screening.
Okay. And then when you get to the school setting, is it, just to be clear, every primary school, every high school would have some sort of support for kids with those developmental delays?
Well, I say this very clearly. The states run our school system. It was amazing the progress we made this week. I know it's very easy to chuck rocks at the political process, and I guess that's the bread and butter of shows like Insiders. But there was something quite remarkable where the Prime Minister and the Premiers just stepped up. The Prime Minister and the Premiers have said they know they want to do more in childcare and schools, but I hasten to say the Commonwealth doesn't know everything. So we need to work with the states in their school settings and childcare and kindergarten. But what we saw on Wednesday, and again the review on Thursday, is that the nation, and it was Liberal Premiers and Labor Premiers, I know that in this case, Mr Dutton and the opposition are pretty open to what we're talking about. They want to see the detail. But the nation's political leaders said, we recognise that to raise a child with a disability, it's going to take all of us, not just the NDIS.
Which is great. But coming back to what's going to happen in the schools, because again, families want to know this foundational support system, Commonwealth's going to be covering 50% of it. Will there be foundational supports in every school, or will you have to shop around for the right school?
We'll have to work with the states to work out what that looks like.
Right.
But you can talk to, there's plenty of teachers probably watching this show, and if not, everyone knows a teacher, where they're saying that they need more support to help with kids with developmental delays. What we saw is not the final outcome, but we saw the Premiers and the Prime Minister, both sides of the political fence, say, yep, we think this is a priority. And I think that's a great development, frankly.
Okay, but it's hard to work out the cost of what this foundational support system will be while you're working out whether it's going to be in every school or not.
Yeah, I can't tell you what every specific invoice will be in 5 years' time, and I don't think that's realistic. But what I do know is that, and one of the people on the couch before was saying, oh, you know, the costs of the scheme. We have said that in about 3 years we can get to an 8% target. So we haven't banked savings prematurely. We're giving ourselves a bit of time to make sure the scheme's there for future generations.
3 years to get to 8%, but it's going to take you 5 years to make these changes. How does that work?
Some of them. Well, no, I think some of the changes, they don't all arrive in year 5, day 365. Right. But if you read the report as we go through it, we're making sure that certainly for the first couple of years, we've got to change legislation, but we've got to work with people with disability to work out the wrinkles, see what works, what doesn't work. There is work going on. There are green shoots of supports outside the system. The other thing we're going to do, which we haven't really spoken about much, is I think quite a bit of the money in the scheme will be saved just by getting rid of the shonks and the rorts. And I think everyone has a story, on one hand, of how NDIS is changing lives. On the other hand, one of the minority of service providers having a lend to the system, overcharging, underservicing.
And I want to come back to that. But just another big question a lot of people will have is assessments. Who's going to decide whether you are on the NDIS or not? At the moment, your doctor does. What's the plan now?
Well, first principle we've said is it shouldn't be diagnosis alone. The aim of the scheme was to understand a person's disability and see how it affects their daily living. That second part is important, the functional outcomes of the disability. The National Disability Insurance Agency, which has been underfunded in the past, is now going to receive more resources, and those decisions have already been made about resourcing them. We would get allied health professionals, people trained in disability to do the assessment, supervised by the agency. One of the things...
So it is an independent assessment?
Well, I think the only thing in common with the previous government's proposition is the word assessment. The quality of what we're doing and the nature of it's very different. One, we would be getting people who are directly accredited with the agency to do it. Two, it wouldn't be a quick and dirty 20-minute interview as was budgeted by the previous government, or half an hour. And then three, what we would also do is then sit down with the person after the assessment. And the thing is, the assessment might say, hey, you probably don't need the full orchestra of the NDIS, but here's some other advice and other places to go.
Yeah, but this is still a big shift. If you've got complex needs and you trust your doctor who knows your situation, can you still use them? Or
that's certainly relevant.
Absolutely. But who makes the call? Is it still someone independent?
Ultimately, the agency makes the call, but we will use, obviously, the evidence provided by people, and they're treating people already know the kids. One of the changes that we're introducing is we want the person making the decision to meet the person about whom the decision is made. In this sort of Byzantine structure that we've inherited, sometimes people were making decisions about other disabled people with never meeting them.
Well, and in opposition, you railed against what the coalition proposed. You said this would be assessments with a stranger. So you're saying they won't be a stranger, they'll spend a bit of time with them?
Well, they might even meet them. They will meet them. Right. The other thing is, under the previous government's proposal, and as I want their support for the legislation, I'm not going to bag them too much, but I will say that they it seemed to us on the external as half an hour, in and out, 20 minutes, bang, quick and dirty. If this assessment takes a lot longer, it takes a lot longer. The other thing that we want to do is we want to help. The scheme is in danger sometimes of becoming a two-class scheme. If you're from a wealthy professional family in the middle of the big cities, you can afford the reports, but there's a lot of people out there who don't have access to the same resources. So one of the propositions is that the agency would pay for the assessment so that there's no economic barrier to people at least investigating their rights.
On the providers, you want to ban the use of unregistered providers. You mentioned earlier trying to get rid of the shonks and the rauders. Not all of them are bad eggs, though, clearly.
No, many are great.
Yeah, and the vast bulk of providers are unregistered. A lot of participants prefer to use them. They like the choice and control. Why do they need to go, and how quickly will that happen?
The report says it'll take about 2 years to create a registration system because we have to talk to everyone to begin with. But for people who are not familiar with NDIS world, in the second quarter of this year, there were 154,000 service providers getting payments for delivering NDIS services who are not registered, and 16,000 who are. We don't have a line of sight. As you correctly observed, we want to make sure that people on the scheme have choice and control over picking their independent support workers if they want, and we don't want that to change. But I think it is reasonable. In fact, I know it's reasonable because I see all the scandals and the rorts, and at least some of them, and we want to find the rest of them. You can't have two currencies in one system. The idea that we have no line of sight to see what the invoice is for and what people are doing and how you can check people out, that's not a sustainable option. It may have worked as the scheme was being bulked up to bring people in, but I want to say to a lot of unregistered providers who are trying to work out what this means. One, the proposal in the report isn't one size fits all. The way that you measure a giant not-for-profit charity delivering disability services compared to a sole trader, that's not what we're looking at. It would be registration based on risk.
I mentioned, just on another matter, I mentioned Anne Connolly's story earlier about what's going on at the NDIS Safeguards Commission. The Commissioner accused by her deputy of scapegoating him for her own blunder. Do you have confidence in the Commission?
We think the Commission needs to step up. That's not a comment on the Commissioner. The Safeguards Commission was set up in 2017 by, I think, Mr Turnbull, and a bit of a reaction to us calling for the Disability Royal Commission, but it didn't get a lot of support. So we've doubled their funding and put in extra people. Clearly, this particular case I can't comment on, but I'm the first minister out of the 10 NDIS ministers, or 9 that have been, to issue a specific direction to the Commission about moving from a sort of educative role to a active compliance role.
Just a final one on another matter too, Bill Shorten. The fallout from the High Court ruling on immigration detainees. Would you have handled things any differently?
No, I think when you look at it, I mean, now we're out of the sort of hothouse of Parliament. High Court, out of the blue, makes a decision on November the 8th. That for 20 years, I guess we're grateful to be in government, but, the whole time of the Liberals, this law didn't get challenged. We get in, it's challenged, and it's found not to be substantiated. High Court makes a decision on November the 8th. Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles, within 1 month, have created preventative detention laws, got community supervision orders, we've got the ability to have electronic tags, and we've also changed the visa conditions. I mean, the High Court didn't even give its reasons for the decision. That had to sort of hurry up. So, I mean, I guess the High Court's got its job to do, but it just sort of tossed this giant problem, demolishing the system, and within 1 month, the Albanese government's resolved it. I mean,
sounds like you're critical of the High Court there.
They've got their job to do, but then we live in the real world and we've got to actually work out what to do. And I think my colleagues, really, when you think about it, considering all the...
Yeah. Are you saying they should have had their reasons ready to go when they announced the decision?
The universe does... I'm not a High Court judge. The universe doesn't grant, reruns of a month ago, but it would have helped, I suspect. But anyway, that's them. That's their prerogative.
Bill Shorten, a very Merry Christmas. Hope you get a good break. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Same to you and your panel participants. See ya.
All right. Thank you very much. Now, coming up, we've got the Matt Price moment. Make sure you tune in for that. Some of the more ridiculous moments of the year, and the winner of that you'll want to see as well. First, let's continue this conversation and back to the panel. Nikki Sava, Claire Armstrong and Claudia Long. Look, just on the High Court ruling, let's go to that. Nikki, it sounded a little critical of the High Court there, if not perhaps wanting to lean in too hard, but it did cause an issue for the government, the fact they didn't have the judgment, but they still released all of the detainees they did before they had that full reasoning from the High Court. Let's just look at where this has left things. 6 of those who've been released have now been arrested over various alleged offences, the latest allegedly for failing to comply with the curfew. Now, under the laws they've passed, that means that person will face a mandatory 1 year back in jail for breaching the curfew.
Yeah, well, obviously, you know, this story is going to play out over a very long period of time. I don't think it's something that can be sorted in just a couple of days, no matter how much the opposition goes on about it. And also, the other point that the opposition makes is, well, they should have only released the one person after the High Court decision. Well, that's preposterous. I mean, imagine if the government had defied the High Court and said, no, we're not going to follow the ruling, or we're only going to follow part of the ruling. We'd be lost. But...
And I want to come back to that issue because there's argument about that, and we've seen the Prime Minister react to that as well.
Yeah, obviously, you know, we've now got... We don't know exactly how many people or what sort of crimes they've committed or... how really they're going to be dealt with. But my understanding is that pretty soon the government is going to set up something called a law enforcement board, probably made up of former state police and border force people, probably the odd lawyer in there, to consider each detainee case by case.
That's interesting. So a new board will do the work of putting together the case to put to the court to preventatively detain them. Now, we don't know how many the government will seek to re-detain. The opposition is demanding to know.
We need to know how many of these criminals will be locked up before Christmas. How many? The laws have to be used to give effect to the concerns and the anxieties of people who have been victims of these perpetrators. If these tough laws are in place, how many of these criminals will be locked up before Christmas?
Claire, the government won't give that number. It says it doesn't want to jeopardise its prospects. Is that fair?
Well, I suspect, as the coalition also previously sort of mounted as an argument, that once you meet the threshold and all of the terms around the legislation for the preventative detention orders, that it won't be anywhere near the 149 people that have now been released as a result of the High Court ruling. So I don't think they want to really have that discussion while they're, excuse me, in the midst of deciding.
No, because I mean, even if they said, look, it's going to be 25, they're going to get hammered for that, right?
It's still, a percentage. I think what's interesting and why it actually is important to look at the cases of where people have been rearrested is actually, you know, Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neil has said multiple times now, if she had her way, they would all be back in jail. So we had a situation on Thursday where a person was arrested and is on an outstanding warrant for their arrest to return back to jail from 10 years ago, which there is a really big question there about if this government was so determined to say if all of these people could stay behind bars, they would, why didn't they check someone that they actually had legal grounds to keep behind?
And underlying all of this, as Nikki mentioned, is the claim from the opposition, they only had to release the one guy, not all of them, right? Now, as Nikki says, the government's argument is that's rubbish. The legal advice says we had to release them all. And the Prime Minister says they've been offering for the past week legal briefings to the opposition to make that clear.
The coalition didn't see it on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's now Saturday. They have not been prepared to walk 20 metres into a room and read the legal advice.
And Claudia, the government says that's because the opposition wants to play politics with this, but it's kind of fundamental to their whole argument here that they didn't have to release all these people onto the streets.
Well, and I have to say, like, this whole debate, I found it incredibly unedifying, right? Like, whether it's the fact that we don't actually know any detail about the circumstances of most of these people, whether it's the Attorney General snapping at a journalist, and I know we'll talk about that in a second, whether it's, if this is true, the opposition being fairly unconstructive. Quite frankly, it would be nice to see this kind of passion for community safety on other issues around the rest of the time. 58 women have been killed in this country this year. Like, this is important, and I'm not saying it's not, but I would like to see a bit of this energy come through for community safety,
that's a good point.
like at other times in the year. Like, this is...
just is a bit frustrating, I have to say.
Just on the Attorney-General, you mentioned that, so he's done a press conference with the Home Affairs Minister and the Immigration Minister about all of this. This was on Wednesday, and a question from Sky News journalist Olivia Casely was along the lines of, you know, will you offer an apology after some of the alleged reoffending by those who've been released? And here was the reaction.
I will not be apologising for upholding the law. I will not be apologising for pursuing the rule of law, and I will not be apologising for acting. Do not interrupt. I will not be apologising for acting. I will not be apologising for acting in accordance with a High Court decision. Your question is an absurd one.
Actually sounded like a pretty fair question to me. He did later apologise to Olivia. What happened there?
Yeah, I was in the room for that one. It was a fair question, and what he tried to answer wasn't the question asked. What he was asked was about apologising for the harm in the community. It wasn't your fault for releasing them. It was about being a government that takes responsibility for community safety, as this government has claimed. And what was kind of ridiculous about that entire scene is that Claire O'Neill had already answered the question. I mean, later the PM, Penny Wong, others also said that community safety was a priority. There was really no need to go where the Attorney-General went. And full disclosure, I think Olivia Casely is a brilliant journalist, and it was a very fair question, and that probably there were some other factors coming into his response there. But the subsequent kind of pouring over excuses for what was really a minister under pressure failing to meet the moment.
Nikki?
Well, he shouldn't have said what he said, and I think he regretted it almost immediately, and then the next morning was prompted by the Prime Minister to apologise. I do think the question was a borderline gotcha question. Say sorry or else. Give us a guarantee or else. You know,
I don't think there was an or else, though. It was a...
No, it wasn't, but that was the sort of tone of it. Like, you know, what Dreyfus was trying to say was, you know, we've been landed with this situation by the High Court and we're trying to deal with it. But, you know, is it the government's fault that these people are reoffending and therefore their responsibility?
No, but there is a debate running about whether the preventative detention regime should have been in place a month earlier.
There is. Look, he shouldn't have said it. It distracted from what the government was trying to say. But I've got to say, sometimes I think there are more glass jaws in the press gallery than there are in the Parliament. I think there are always robust discussions and press conferences, and people react probably in ways that they shouldn't.
I don't know if it's glass jaws in the press gallery. It's about how it looks to the people.
Anyway, story of the day.
Okay, just very quickly.
Sorry, I'd just like to add to that. I think sometimes Labor forget that the now infamous gaffes from someone like Scott Morrison about not having responsibility, or the Prime Minister for Women, those weren't just things that he stood up and said on a good day. He was under pressure in media conferences, and it's about meeting the moment and having humility in that moment. And for a government that defines itself so wholly as the antithesis of the regime that came before it, it would be nice to see an understanding of that's the environment, and the reality of being in government is you'll be under pressure sometimes.
Yeah, look, I want to move on because we've got a couple more things to talk about. The industrial relations change. A lot of deals done this week, as I mentioned, but this one took a lot of people by surprise. They didn't get all of their industrial relations reforms through. Some they'll have to come back to next year. But they did agree to split the bill, which governments don't usually do. And they got more through than they'd earlier thought they might, particularly this loophole, as they call it, on labour hire. So particularly the big companies, BHP and Qantas, who use labour hire a lot, will now have to pay those workers the same as regular employees if they're doing the same work. Tony Burke was obviously thrilled about this. The unions were too, and the business groups who've spent, $24 million trying to fight this, were pretty outraged by it all. My understanding is the government wants to next year use this as an opportunity to target those mining workers in some marginal Queensland seats and let them know they're on their side. But Claudia, what do you think here? This was a bit of a surprise and an opportunity, I suppose, the government used with the crossbench to get something done.
I think this might be a case of having to watch this one next year and see if they can actually get the rest of this bill over the line. This potentially is going to turn into a case of near enough is good enough, right? Because that's the risk you run splitting a bill, is all the hard parts might just be pushed off into the never, never. It's going to be really interesting to see this campaign that's already really starting to take shape, particularly from the mining groups who are calling this sneaky, I think underhanded, things like that. Best of luck running that campaign during a cost of living crisis when people can barely afford to put food on the table in some cases. This is about, and the government's really running this line of this is about paying people fairly, this is about giving people enough money to get by.
But if productivity doesn't improve, you can bet business groups in the opposition will say, this is why.
I just wonder if that's going to have cut through with people who can't actually afford to go to the dentist.
No,
I'm just wondering.
Possibly not.
We'll see.
Yeah, no, exactly, exactly. What did Nikki? What did you think of this IR win for the government?
Well, the bottom line is that they were desperate for a win, right?
Yeah.
And Pocock and Lambie were very heavily invested in these changes to improve health and safety for workers. So they were very amenable to a deal with the government, and the government accommodated them. Both sides, crossbenchers and the government, won. Yes, the MCA was very unhappy about it and threatening all sorts of things, but I can tell you that the only people who were ringing Jackie Lambie's office after the deal were saying, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Now, the week began with some very sad news, in fact, which the Prime Minister struggled to announce.
A short time ago, Peter Murphy passed away at home, which was her wish. Peter Murphy was brave, she was courageous, and she was loved.
She certainly was all of that. The funeral for Peter Murphy will be held on Friday in Melbourne. The amazing thing is that she was only in the Parliament the week before her death, and still fighting for the things she believed in. One of her legacies, and we heard some beautiful tributes in the condolence motions on Wednesday from both sides. One of her legacies was chairing this parliamentary inquiry into gambling ads, calling for a phase out completely of all gambling advertising. What are the prospects, Claire, of that happening?
The government already has sort of indicated it's not looking to go anywhere near as far as what that committee recommended. I think what we may see from Labor in this term is some movement around when and how gambling can be advertised, but I don't see any prospect of it being to the extent that obviously that committee recommended.
Which was a cross-party recommendation, so they did well in that inquiry. And look, there will of course be a by-election in her seat of Dunkley early in the new year. It'll be an early test for both sides, something to look forward to next year. Well, this is our final show of the year, and that means it's time for one of our favourites, the Matt Price moment. It is 16 years since we lost Matt, hard to believe. He was a much-loved and brilliant press gallery journalist and Insiders panellist who could poke fun at the ridiculous aspects of politics like no one else. And when he died at just 46, Barry Cassidy launched the Matt Price moment, a celebration of the absurd and wacky moments that really would have given Matt a good chuckle. Here are this year's finalists.
The government has no intention of countenancing reforms that would circumcise its power. Of countenancing our... I didn't say that, so I seem to have snipped the wrong part of my question.
I talk to people who are sitting having a quiet beer in a pub on a Sunday afternoon and working out that, they'll get 3 schooners from their jug of beer and then they might have to go home. This is awful for a lot of Australian families.
The time to interject is when the minister is speaking, not when... Well, I correct that record. Let's get on with it.
Now, they're going to try and get the sausage shot.
You're going to cover up.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
I saw some emojis that Gen Z used that is actually offensive, but my generation is sending these emojis. Like a happy face, that can actually mean the opposite in Gen Z land. Happy to give you a briefing on that, but...
And how we grow jobs and new industries as well. When that footage is shown on Insiders at a couple of minutes to 10 on Sunday morning. People will realise just quite how loud that was.
Hands up in front of your face.
Oh, yeah.
You can actually see them. Yeah?
Yeah, that's cool.
Just like for real. Put your right hand on the stick, sir. I'm gonna help you out if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Right there. Left hand on the throttle. There you go, sir. Okay.
Where's the Grand Canyon?
The Grand Canyon is several hundred miles away.
Yeah, okay.
Welcome back to the ground, sir.
Very good.
A 5-day washed out test in Sydney is much better than a 5-day test in Adelaide. At the end of it, you spent 5 days in Adelaide.
I'm just a hunter burning love. A hunter burning love. Just a hunter burning love. A hunter burning love. Just a hunter burning love.
Thanks so much.
Oh dear, all worthy contenders, but there can only be one winner. Take a bow, Senator Jane Hume.
I think it was Winston Churchill that said taxing your way out of a budget crisis is like lifting yourself up by the handle, lifting yourself, standing in a bucket with the handle. Something as articulate as that, I'm sure Winston Churchill said. But...
That's why I never quote Winston Churchill. Thank you all very much for your contributions this year. Please keep them coming in 2024. Our panel, Claudia Long, Nikki Sava and Claire Armstrong, will be back shortly with some final observations. Time now, though, for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this morning with the one and only Jack the Insider, columnist for The Australian, with the traditional bin fire that was 2023.
Compared to 2020, 2021, 2022, it's been a positive improvement, but still a bin fire, mate.
It was a tense final week of Parliament, Jack, as both major parties fought the law and each other. And I think, I'm not sure the law won.
Yeah, not sure that the law did win.
David Rose got all the worms popping out the top, and the opposition leader Peter Dutton saying, "Don't gloat, Michaelia." Well, maybe just a little.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Eyes ahead.
Yes.
Michaelia, I can see you doing this.
Was it foreseeable though, Mike? I think it probably was.
Probably was.
You should plan for these things.
In the bin.
In the bin. Oh, there we go.
Lovely Matt Golding, how the new laws would work. What are you in for?
Something I haven't done yet.
Yeah, the crime's a work in progress.
Well, yes, allegedly.
Allegedly. It certainly generated a lot of tense scenes. The Attorney General, Mark Dreyfus, very bad optics.
Yes, went a little bit hard, didn't he?
I will not apologise. Of course, Michaelia Cash generated a lot of yelling in the Senate.
He does let rip.
Her coat looks like it's straight from the scene of Sound of Music. And there's a number of the opposition senators getting in on the act.
Oh, and a bit of finger pointing.
Yeah. Lovely Brett Lethbridge, Going Off it's titled, and how many wheels does that thing have left?
Indigenous affairs. Energy, home affairs, immigration.
Yeah.
And looks like we're running on the axle there, Mike.
Yeah, it's a four-wheel dive.
He's a very talented cartoonist.
Yes, he's had a very good year as Brett Lethbridge. It was a case of good cop, bad cop as the world's good and great gathered in Dubai for COP28.
Yes, talk about climate change, do a few business deals in the evening. That's kind of how it works.
Yeah, we need more plants.
Plants.
Oil, gas and coal plants. Am I right? Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.
Yes.
I'm here all week.
That's from Kathy Wilcox. Yeah. Yes, that's right. He was there all week. Yeah. And he's still there. And, gee, what's this black squelchy stuff under the stand? Let's get a drill in there right now.
Yes. David Pope has done the Foxy Fuel Lobby with, and he's got a play on COP, which is COOP 28, Global Chicken Coop Resilience Conference. Just to clarify my earlier remarks about the vital role of existing reserves of sheer fox cunning in the transition.
Yeah,
fossil fowls.
There you go.
Jack, it was a sad occasion this week. It was quite a juxtaposition between the fighting that went on and then on Wednesday the day was given over in the House of Reps to condolence motion for the former member for Dunkley, Peter Murphy, who was an exceptional member, local member.
Well loved by everyone. It shouldn't need a bereavement, should it?
No.
To bring some sort of normality to the conversation.
There was a bouquet of flowers was placed on a seat and there were some really quite moving speeches.
Yes, more people should see that side of it too. Yes.
Well, it's the time of year when we have a bit of a chat about who did well in cartooning, and there was so much debate in the Insider's office. And the first is to Megan Herbert, who's had a sensational year. I particularly like this running out of belt.
Belt can still be tightened, but we're running out of holes.
Yep, yeah, Megan gets an honourable mention. But the three that we thought were the best of the year was John Kadelka's Nobody Left Behind.
And who's that then?
Nobody.
Can't pay the rent as they wander past.
You can see the band playing. That was a lovely job, John. And Mark's night with the former RBA Governor, Philip Lowe, the trick is to know when to stop.
You've got to sand down a rack before you put someone on it, because you wouldn't want anyone to get splintered.
And he's benched the Dragon for this one too. And just an absolute ripper, Matt Golding's Cost of Living, which has got the red ropes with the various lanes.
Well, you stay away from the chocolates unless you've got we'll need to go through your bank account before you wander down that aisle.
Planning on major purchase today, madam, or just browsing? Jack, it's been a great pleasure unpicking the bin fire that was 2023. I'll let you do the honours.
Oh, it's back to you, Spearsy, and a very Merry Christmas to all.
And right back at you, Jack. Mike, thank you very much for that. Let's get some final observations for the year. Claudia.
Well, the Education Ministers are meeting in Canberra tomorrow. We've just had the PISA results back that have really shown just how entrenched inequality is in Australian education. They're going to be looking at school funding. So it looks like they've got their work cut out for them. And just quickly, this program for 20 years has had a very loyal viewer in teacher Ray from Canberra, who sadly passed away this week. So thank you, Ray, for instilling the passion that you have for politics into many of your students.
Oh, that's a wonderful tribute. And thoughts to all of Ray's loved ones as well. Claire.
Just wanted to pick up on, in the wake of Peter Murphy's death, metastatic or stage 4 breast cancer kills about 9 Australian women a day, 3,300 a year. Advocates have long been calling for a national system to properly collect data on the different stages of this really aggressive cancer. Obviously, it's incurable but treatable, so that the health funding can be best directed to where it's needed. I can't think of a better legacy for a really great local member who will be really missed from Parliament.
Yeah, well said. Nikki.
The New South Wales Liberal Party has embarked on a program to reform its constitution and pre-selection processes. Surprise, surprise, it's triggered a factional war between the moderates and the right.
Doesn't sound like the New South Wales Liberal Party at all.
Nothing at all like it. But there's concern that it could lead to another debacle similar to the one that beset Scott Morrison in the lead up to 22 election, which could make it difficult for Dutton to pick up the seats that he needs in New South Wales, like McKellen or Sydney, Gilmore, Bennelong. And the other thing is Dutton has shown that he's got very little influence at all over the New South Wales branch.
Yeah, the pre-selection recently showed that. Look, thank you all very much, and a big thanks to the Insiders team for a huge year, which, amongst everything else, involved moving this program to Canberra. A particular shout out to executive producer Sam Clark for steering the ship, to Josh Martin, Georgia Cranko and Jordan Butler for all your work getting us to air each week. Our editors, creative team and studio crew. Arthur Hill, our floor manager over here, thank you. The one and only Mike Bowers and all of his Talking Pictures guests, including producer and award-winning cartoonist Fiona Katauskas. They pierce through the guff and they make us laugh each week. Hugh Parkinson for your unique creative genius too. The wonderful panellists who make this show what it is with your insights and analysis. And yes, all the politicians who front up, thank you. Most of all, thanks to you at home for spending your Sunday mornings with us. Stay safe over the holidays. We'll be back before Parliament resumes. We'll leave you with a look back at the big moments of 2023, edited by the amazing Helen Bromley. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, someone take charge here. Hey, how you going?
I live to serve you, mate.
Well, welcome back.
Always nice to start the parliamentary year here together.
There we go.
What are those idiots doing?
Welcome home.
Remember when Philip Lowe told the nation there would likely be no interest rate hikes until 2024?
The Reserve Bank has raised interest rates for the 9th time in a row. 10th consecutive interest rate hike.
We are closer to a pause, and it's a matter of logic, really.
Well, the pause was short-lived.
The issue for mortgage holders is, are they the meat in the sandwich here?
The current Communicator-in-Chief's term expires in September.
If the government would like me to stay, then I'm happy to stay.
Michelle Bullock will become the first woman to ever lead the Reserve Bank in this country.
The starter's gun has been fired.
A proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia.
But there was a resounding no to the Prime Minister's Canberra voice.
Lydia Thorpe has sensationally walked out on the Greens.
Treaty before voice.
To not put this to a vote is to concede defeat.
No.
Millions of Australians are heading to polling booths.
Exercise of Australian democracy. Sad day. I had some butterflies in my tummy.
We now have no path for the Yes campaign.
Australia has voted no. 3 states voting no. The referendum is defeated as well, whatever happens in Queensland and Western Australia.
As Prime Minister, I will always accept responsibility.
I know the last few months have been tough.
This is the referendum that Australia did not need to have. Now changing pace slightly, I'm sorry.
Hello.
Some sort of long-necked turtle.
Isn't she lovely?
Your tongue's for smelling, right?
Yes. Oh, they're very large teeth you have.
She's very sweet.
Alan Tudge will quit Parliament today, triggering a by-election battle in the Melbourne seat of Aston.
Sorry, just bear with me for a second. I know there was a cold sweat dripping down his back.
Not quite your standard. No.
You've had no enforced errors yet.
Labor has made history and will win the Aston by-election.
I guess I'll be your next member for Aston, eh?
I'm proud to be your shipmate.
Anthony Albanese has defended the extent of his overseas travel.
I'm sorry I didn't bring my sandpaper with me.
I'm not quite sure how I top this for date night with Jodie.
People were saying that we have a handsome boy coming from Australia.
How are you?
I look forward to heading home, I've got to say.
Palestinian gunmen have crossed into Israel, opening fire on civilians in a surprise dawn attack. As we go to air, reports are emerging of Israelis being taken captive.
Allahu Akbar! Citizens of Israel, we are at war.
It was the slaughter of innocent people.
The forecourt became an angry shade of red.
I saw anti-Semitism being expressed.
If they're visa holders, the visa should be cancelled immediately.
We can't say we only grieve for certain people who are slaughtered.
An explosion at a busy hospital in Gaza.
Based on what I've seen, it appears as though it was done by the other team, not you.
The international community will not accept ongoing civilian deaths.
This Prime Minister needs to stand up and to be united with the Jewish community, and he's not.
And what we have seen from this bloke here is consistent with his entire political career.
Israel and Hamas have agreed to a 4-day temporary ceasefire to allow for the release of hostages.
So I would like to make it clear, we are at war and we will continue the war.
My question is to the Prime Minister.
My question is to the Prime Minister.
The question is to the Prime Minister.
My question is to the Prime Minister.
My question is to the Prime Minister.
Prime Minister of our country.
I could use you in question time, I reckon.
Order. The member for Barker has been continually interjecting and will leave the chamber under 94A. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Hello. Merry Christmas.
we are officially launching Christmas for the whole nation for 2023. Who loves Christmas?
This is a fine Christmas tradition.
I want other parents to share the joy that I have over years of having to step across Lego.
I hope that 2024 is a more peaceful time. So I wish everyone a Merry Christmas.
Yeah.